I was standing in my driveway in Ridgewood, New Jersey, enjoying my Saturday morning coffee when I saw her marching toward me like a woman on a mission. Karren Hartford, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, had that particular expression on her face that every homeowner in our neighborhood had learned to dread. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair bounced with each determined step, and she clutched a manila folder against her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Warren Vance," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk about that monstrosity on your property immediately." I took a slow sip of my coffee, already knowing this conversation was going nowhere good. "Good morning to you too, Karren. What seems to be the problem?" She stopped at the edge of my driveway, her designer heels clicking on the pavement. Behind her I could see two other HOA board members hovering near their cars like nervous backup singers. Patricia Reynolds and Brenda Mitchell, both cut from the same cloth as Karren, though neither possessed quite the same level of righteous indignation. "Don't play dumb with me," Karren snapped, opening her folder and pulling out a photograph. She thrust it toward me. "This cell tower, it needs to come down." I looked at the photo, which showed the 150-foot cellular tower that had been on my property for the past 8 years. The same tower that had been there when I bought the house, and the same tower that had been there long before this particular HOA board took power 2 years ago. "That tower has been here since 2018, I said calmly. "I have all the permits, licenses, and legal documentation. The lease agreement with Verizon is completely legitimate and was grandfathered in when the neighborhood was developed." Karren's face flushed red. "I don't care about your paperwork. The HOA has voted, and we've decided it's an eyesore that negatively impacts property values. You have 30 days to remove it, or we'll be forced to take legal action." I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and crossed my arms. "Karren, you can't just demand I remove a legally permitted structure that was here before most of these houses were even built. That's not how property rights work. The HOA covenants clearly state that no structures can be erected without board approval." Patricia chimed in from behind Karren, her voice wavering slightly. She was always the nervous one. "Erected being the key word," I replied. "I didn't erect it. It was already here. And if you actually read those covenants, you'd see there's an exception clause for pre-existing structures with proper municipal permits." Karren's jaw tightened. "We'll see what our lawyer has to say about that. Consider this your official notice." She pulled out another document from her folder and practically threw it at me. 30 days, Warren, or we start fining you $500 per day until it's removed." As she turned to leave, I called out, "Karren, before you go, I have to ask, do you know that tower provides cell service to this entire neighborhood?" She paused mid-stride but didn't turn around. "That's not our concern. There are plenty of other towers in the area." "Actually, there aren't," I said. "That's Verizon's only tower within a 3-mile radius. When they built it, they specifically chose this location because of the geography. The hills around here create dead zones everywhere else." Karren spun around, her expression defiant. "Then Verizon can build another one somewhere else. That's their problem, not ours." I couldn't help but smile. "So you're willing to lose cell service for the entire neighborhood just to get rid of a tower you think is ugly?" "If that's what it takes," she said icily. "The HOA's authority must be respected. Good day, Warren." I watched them leave, already knowing this was going to get interesting. What Karren didn't know was that I'd done my homework years ago when I bought this property specifically because of the tower. The lease agreement I had with Verizon paid me $48,000 annually, and the contract was ironclad with another 12 years remaining. More importantly, I knew exactly what the legal landscape looked like regarding HOA authority over telecommunications infrastructure. That evening I called my attorney, Marcus Chen, who'd handled the property purchase back in 2018. He listened to my explanation of the situation and let out a low whistle. "They really don't know what they're getting into, do they?" he said. "Apparently not," I replied. "What are our options?" "Well, first off, they have absolutely no legal standing to demand you remove that tower. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 specifically limits the authority of local governments and HOAs over wireless facilities. They can't regulate them in a way that prohibits service, and they definitely can't demand removal of an existing permitted structure." That's what I thought. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued. "They can still make your life miserable with harassment, fines, and legal proceedings. Even though they'll lose, it'll cost you time and money to fight them. So what do you suggest?" "Let me draft a response letter laying out the legal reality. Sometimes these HOA boards back down when they realize they're outmatched. If not, we'll have to get more aggressive." 2 days later, Marcus sent a detailed letter to the HOA board, complete with citations to federal law, state statutes, and relevant case law. The letter made it clear that any attempt to force removal of the tower would result in immediate legal action, and that the HOA would likely be liable for damages, legal fees, and potentially violation of federal telecommunications law. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. The following week, I received a notice that the HOA was scheduling a special meeting to discuss enforcement actions regarding property violations. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community center. I showed up 15 minutes early and found the meeting room already half full. My neighbors filed in, many of them looking confused about why they'd been summoned. The room could hold about 100 people, and by the time 7 o'clock rolled around, at least 75 residents had gathered. Karren called the meeting to order, banging a gavel like she was presiding over the Supreme Court. She wore a navy pantsuit and had her hair pulled back in a tight bun, clearly trying to project maximum authority. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We've called this meeting to discuss a serious violation of community standards by one of our residents. Warren Vance has refused to comply with an HOA directive to remove an unsightly cell tower from his property." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw several neighbors glancing at me, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. "The board believes this tower significantly impacts our property values and the aesthetic character of Willow Creek," Karren continued. "We've given Mr. Vance 30 days to remove it, but he's refused to cooperate. We're here tonight to vote on imposing daily fines and potentially pursuing legal action." I raised my hand. "I'd like to address the board and the residents." Karren's expression soured. "This isn't an open forum, Warren." "Actually," said Tom Brennan, one of the older residents who'd lived here since the neighborhood was first developed, "HOA bylaws state that any resident affected by a proposed board action has the right to speak. I move that we allow Warren to address the group." "I second that," called out Janet Morrison, another longtime resident. Karren looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't without violating their own rules. "Fine, 5 minutes." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Thank you. First, I want to make something clear. That cell tower has been on my property since 2018, 2 years before most of you even moved here. It's fully permitted, legally compliant, and protected under federal telecommunications law. The HOA has exactly zero authority to demand its removal." "That's your opinion," Patricia interjected. "No, it's federal law," I replied. "The Telecommunications Act of 1996 specifically prevents local governments and HOAs from prohibiting or effectively prohibiting wireless service. But here's what I really want you all to understand. That tower provides cell service to this entire neighborhood. It's the only Verizon tower within 3 miles. That got people's attention. I saw several residents pulling out their phones, glancing at their screens. If that tower goes down, everyone here loses service," I continued. "No cell calls, no data, no hotspots. And because of the hills surrounding Willow Creek, no other carrier has good coverage here either. AT&T and T-Mobile both piggyback on that Verizon tower through sharing agreements." Karren stood up abruptly. "That's fear-mongering. There are towers all over Bergen County." "Not within range of this neighborhood," I countered. "The nearest alternative tower is on Route 17, more than 3 miles away, and there are 2 significant hills between here and there. Cell signals don't penetrate hills well. That's why Verizon chose this specific location." "Wait," said Michael Chen, a younger resident who worked in tech. "Are you saying if that tower gets removed, we'd all lose service?" "Completely," I confirmed. "I've seen the coverage maps. This is a known dead zone without that tower." The murmur in the room grew louder. People were definitely concerned now. Karren banged her gavel. "This is irrelevant. The issue is property values and community standards." "Actually, it's extremely relevant," I said. "Because if you somehow succeeded in forcing that tower down, which you legally can't, you'd be destroying everyone's property values far more than the tower ever could. Try selling a house with no cell service in 2026. See how that goes." Tom Brennan stood up. "Karren, did the board research any of this before making this demand?" "We researched property value impacts," Karren said defensively. "Studies show that cell towers within view of residential properties can reduce values by up to 10%. "And did you research what happens to property values when an entire neighborhood has no cell service?" I asked. "Because I did. Houses in cell phone dead zones sell for 15 to 20% less than comparable properties with good coverage." The room erupted in conversation. I could see the tide turning. These were practical people who relied on their phones for everything from work to staying connected with family. The idea of losing service was clearly alarming. Karren tried to regain control. "Everyone, please. We need to maintain order." "I move to table this discussion until the board can provide more complete information," Tom said loudly, "including independent verification of the cell coverage situation and legal consultation on the HOA's actual authority here." "Seconded," at least 5 voices called out. Karren's face had gone from red to almost purple. "You can't just undermine the board's authority like this. We're not undermining anything, Janet Morrison said, standing up. We're asking for due diligence. That's what the board is supposed to do before taking action that affects the entire community. The vote to table the discussion passed overwhelmingly, despite Karren, Patricia, and Brenda voting against it. As the meeting broke up, several neighbors came over to talk to me, thanking me for the information and expressing their concerns about the HOA's approach. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would put an end to Karren's crusade. But I'd underestimated her stubbornness and her absolute need to win every conflict. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, Donald Westbrook. The letter was 12 pages of legal threats and demands, essentially reiterating the HOA's position but with more aggressive language. They were threatening fines of $1,000 per day starting immediately, and they claimed they would place a lien on my property if I didn't comply. I forwarded it to Marcus, who called me within an hour. They've lost their minds, he said without preamble. They can't enforce these fines, they have no legal basis. So what do? We file in federal court for a declaratory judgment and an injunction against the HOA. We'll also sue for harassment and violation of the Telecommunications Act. This is going to get expensive for them. How expensive? If we win, which we will, they'll be liable for your legal fees plus potential damages. We're talking 6 figures minimum. The HOA's insurance might not even cover it because they're acting against legal advice, assuming their attorney is telling them the truth about their chances. You think their lawyer is lying to them? Marcus paused. I think their lawyer is either incompetent or telling them what they want to hear to rack up billable hours. No competent attorney would advise them they can win this fight. We filed our lawsuit in federal district court 2 weeks later. The complaint laid out the facts clearly. The tower was legally permitted, protected under federal law, and the HOA had no authority to demand its removal. We also included a detailed affidavit from a Verizon engineer explaining the coverage situation and confirming that removing the tower would eliminate service to the entire Willow Creek neighborhood. The lawsuit made the local news. A reporter from the Bergen Record called me for comment, and I gave her the full story. The article that ran the following day was titled, "HOA Battles Homeowner Over Cell Tower That Provides Neighborhoods Only Service." It wasn't flattering to Karren and the board. That's when things got really nasty. I started receiving violation notices for everything imaginable. My grass was allegedly a 1/4 inch too long. My mailbox was supposedly the wrong shade of black. I had received a package delivery that sat on my porch for 3 hours before I got home from work, which apparently violated some obscure rule about outdoor storage. Every single violation came with a $50 fine. I documented everything, photographing my lawn with a measuring tape, comparing my mailbox to my neighbor's, and keeping a log of every frivolous complaint. Marcus assured me it was all evidence of harassment that would help our case. But Karren wasn't done. At the next regular HOA meeting, which I didn't attend, the board passed a new rule requiring special architectural approval for any structure over 15 feet tall, with an immediate compliance deadline of 60 days. It was clearly targeted at my tower, and it was clearly illegal, but it showed how desperate they were getting. The real turning point came about 6 weeks after we filed our lawsuit. I was at work, a software company in Paramus where I worked as a senior developer, when my phone started blowing up with messages from neighbors. "Is your cell service down?" texted Michael Chen. "No signal at all at home," wrote Susan Yang. "Did something happen to the tower?" asked Tom Brennan. I called Verizon immediately and got transferred to their network operations center. After explaining who I was and my relationship to the tower, they confirmed what I suspected. "Someone cut the power line to that tower," the technician told me. "We got the alert about 3 hours ago. We're trying to get a crew out there, but we're dealing with multiple sites down across the region because of that storm last night. How long until it's back up? Could be 24 to 48 hours. We have to replace the damaged line and some of the equipment." I immediately suspected sabotage, but I didn't have proof. What I did know was that the entire neighborhood was now experiencing exactly what I'd warned them about. Complete loss of cell service. By the time I got home that evening, my doorbell had rung 6 times. Neighbors wanted to know what happened and when service would be restored. I explained the situation honestly. Someone had damaged the power supply and Verizon was working on repairs. "Karren is saying this proves the tower is unreliable and needs to go," Michael told me, shaking his head. "She sent out an email blast to the whole neighborhood." "Of course she did," I muttered. The next day was a Saturday, and I decided to take a walk to the tower to see the damage for myself. The tower sat on the back corner of my 5-acre property, screened by trees from most views. The power line ran underground from my house to the tower's equipment shed. When I got there, I found something interesting. The damage wasn't from the storm. Someone had clearly dug up a section of the line and cut through it with some kind of tool. The cut was clean and there were shovel marks in the disturbed soil. I took photographs from every angle and called the Ridgewood Police Department. Officer David Kowalski arrived about 20 minutes later. You think someone vandalized this intentionally? He asked, examining the cut line. I know they did, I said, showing him the photos. That's not storm damage. He took his own photos and filed a report. This is criminal mischief at minimum, possibly criminal trespass depending on where your property line is. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I have suspicions but no proof, I said carefully. I explained the ongoing dispute with the HOA. Officer Kowalski raised his eyebrows. That's quite a situation. We'll investigate, but without witnesses or security camera footage, it's going to be tough to prove anything. I understand. I just want it documented. That evening, I got a surprise visitor. Tom Brennan showed up at my door looking angry. I just talked to Rick Hutchins, he said without preamble. Rick was one of the maintenance contractors the HOA used for various tasks. He said Karren approached him last week asking if he knew anyone who could disable the tower. He thought she was joking, but now he's not so sure. Did he tell the police this? He's willing to, but he's nervous about retaliation. He does a lot of work for HOAs in the area, and Karren has connections. Tell him to call Officer Kowalski at the Ridgewood PD, I said, giving Tom the case number. What he knows could be important. Over the next few days, the neighborhood's frustration with the lack of cell service reached a fever pitch. People couldn't work from home. Parents couldn't reach their kids. The elderly residents were especially concerned about being unable to call for help in an emergency. Several families had to purchase temporary landlines just to have phone service. And through it all, Karren continued her campaign, sending emails about how this proved the tower was a liability that needed to be removed. She seemed completely oblivious to the irony that the tower's temporary outage was demonstrating exactly how essential it was. Verizon got the tower back online after 43 hours. The relief in the neighborhood was palpable. But the damage to Karren's position was significant. A group of about 30 residents signed a petition calling for the HOA board to drop its fight against the tower, and several people were openly calling for Karren's resignation. Then Rick Hutchins went to the police. He told them that Karren had offered him $5,000 to make the tower stop working for a while. He'd refused, but he gave them the names of 2 other contractors she'd approached. One of them, a guy named Larry Stenson, apparently agreed to do it. The police brought Larry in for questioning. Faced with the evidence and the testimony from Rick Hutchins, Larry admitted he'd cut the power line. He also admitted that Karren had paid him $2,500 in cash to do it, with a promise of another $2,500 once the tower situation was resolved. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I watched from my front window as 2 police cars pulled up to Karren Hartford's house. Officers arrested her for criminal conspiracy, criminal mischief, and destruction of property. The charges also included interfering with telecommunications infrastructure, which was a federal offense. The look on her face as they led her to the patrol car was something I'll never forget. Not because I took pleasure in her arrest, but because she still seemed to believe she'd done nothing wrong. Even as they read her rights, she was protesting that she was protecting the community. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that night. Patricia Reynolds and Brenda Mitchell both resigned immediately, clearly wanting to distance themselves from Karren's actions. Tom Brennan was appointed interim president, and one of his first acts was to send me a formal letter apologizing for the board's actions and confirming that the HOA was dropping all claims against the tower. The federal lawsuit settled 2 weeks later. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay my legal fees, which had reached $68,000, plus another $50,000 in damages. The settlement also included a permanent injunction barring the HOA from taking any action against the tower. Karren's legal troubles were just beginning. In addition to the state criminal charges, the federal prosecutor filed charges related to the interference with telecommunication infrastructure. She eventually pleaded guilty to several charges and received 2 years of probation, a $20,000 fine, and 500 hours of community service. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in New Jersey. Larry Stenson got probation and community service as well, though he cooperated fully with the prosecution and testified against Karren. The civil lawsuit was another matter entirely. Verizon sued both Karren personally and the HOA for the damage to their equipment and the service interruption. That case settled for an undisclosed amount, but I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that it was in the low 6 figures. The HOA's insurance covered most of it, but the incident led to a massive increase in their premiums, which meant higher dues for everyone. In the aftermath, the neighborhood had to reckon with what had happened. There was a lot of soul-searching about how the HOA had gotten so out of control and how to prevent it from happening again. Tom Brennan led an effort to revise the HOA's bylaws, adding better checks and balances on board authority and requiring board members to consult with legal counsel before taking significant enforcement actions. I attended the meeting where they voted on the new bylaws. Nearly every homeowner in Willow Creek showed up, which was unprecedented. The changes passed with only 3 dissenting votes. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to apologize. Some had initially supported Karren's position, either because they genuinely thought the tower was an eyesore or because they trusted her judgment as HOA president. They'd learned a hard lesson about blind trust in authority. "I feel like an idiot," Susan Yang told me, shaking her head. "Karren made it sound like you were the problem, and I just believed her without doing any research." "Don't be too hard on yourself," I said. "She was convincing, and people want to trust their HOA board. That's normal. Still, I should have asked more questions. We all should have." Michael Chen, the tech worker, had a different take. "This whole thing has made me think about HOA governance in general. We give these boards a lot of power, but there's often very little oversight. It's kind of scary." He wasn't wrong. The whole experience had given me a new appreciation for the importance of active participation in community governance. HOAs can be valuable organizations, but they can also become tyrannical when the wrong people get power and residents don't pay attention. The tower remained exactly where it had always been, quietly providing cell service to the entire neighborhood. I negotiated a new lease with Verizon that actually increased my annual payment to $55,000. Reflecting the increased value of the location after the service interruption had demonstrated its importance. I used some of the settlement money to install a comprehensive security system around the tower, including cameras and motion sensors. I wasn't taking any chances on future sabotage attempts. Life in Willow Creek gradually returned to normal, though the incident left its mark. The neighborhood was more engaged with HOA matters, with attendance at monthly meetings jumping from the typical dozen or so residents to 40 or 50. Tom Brennan was elected to a full term as president in the annual election, running unopposed. Patricia Reynolds and Brenda Mitchell quietly moved out of the neighborhood within 6 months. Apparently unable to face the judgment of their neighbors, I ran into Karren Hartford one more time, about a year after her arrest. I was getting coffee at a cafe in downtown Ridgewood when I saw her sitting alone at a corner table. She looked different, older somehow, with gray roots showing in her hair and none of the aggressive confidence she'd once projected. Our eyes met, and for a moment I thought she might just look away. Instead, she stood up and walked over to me. "Warren," she said quietly, "can I talk to you for a minute?" I gestured to the empty chair at my table. "Sure." She sat down, clutching her coffee cup. "I want to apologize for everything." I didn't say anything, just waited. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she continued. "I convinced myself that the tower was hurting property values and that I was protecting the community. But I was really just on a power trip. I couldn't stand that you wouldn't do what I told you to do." "That's honest," I said. "The therapy I've been doing, part of my probation, it's helped me see how out of control I'd gotten. I made everyone miserable, including myself. And I broke the law because I was too stubborn to admit I was wrong." "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "It takes courage to admit you were wrong." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm sorry." We talked for a few more minutes. She told me she'd sold her house in Willow Creek and moved to a condo in Hackensack. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office, a far cry from her previous career in marketing management. The criminal conviction had made finding professional work difficult. I didn't feel victorious watching her struggle. If anything, I felt sad that it had come to this. Karren Hartford had destroyed her own life over a dispute she couldn't win and wouldn't let go. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority and ego. After she left, I sat in the cafe for a while, thinking about the whole experience. In a strange way, the cell tower dispute had made Willow Creek a better community. People were more engaged, more aware of their rights and responsibilities. The HOA was functioning better with Tom's measured leadership and the new bylaws that prevented any single person from wielding too much power. My relationship with my neighbors had actually improved. I was no longer just the quiet guy at the end of the cul-de-sac who kept to himself. People knew me now, trusted me, and several had become genuine friends. Michael Chen and I started a monthly tech meetup at the community center. Tom Brennan invited me to join his poker night. Susan Yang's kids started coming over to play with my dog, a rescue beagle named Chester that I'd adopted a few months after the lawsuit settled. The tower itself became something of a neighborhood landmark, though not in the way Karren had feared. It was a reminder of what happened when leadership went wrong and what could happen when a community came together to fix it. Some people joked about putting up a historical marker, site of the Great Cell Tower War of 2026. Verizon eventually offered to upgrade the tower with newer technology that would provide faster 5G service. The process required some additional permitting, and the new HOA board handled it efficiently and professionally, approving the upgrade after a single meeting where they reviewed the technical specs and confirmed everything met current regulations. I made sure to thank Tom for the smooth process. "This is how it should have been from the beginning," I told him. "We learned our lesson," he replied. "Sometimes the hard way is the only way people actually learn." The legal fees from the Karren Hartford disaster had cost the HOA nearly $200,000 when everything was added up. The insurance had covered most of it, but the premium increases meant residents were paying higher dues for years to come. It was an expensive education in the importance of good governance and the dangers of letting personal vendettas override common sense. I occasionally wondered what would have happened if I'd just backed down when Karren first confronted me. Would she have moved on to target someone else? Would the HOA have continued down that authoritarian path? I'd never know for sure, but I suspected that standing my ground had ultimately done the neighborhood a favor, even though it had been stressful and expensive at the time. The tower continued to generate its annual income, which I appreciated more now than ever. I'd been saving most of it, and I used a chunk to renovate my house, adding a home office with excellent soundproofing for my remote work days, and a deck off the back where I could sit and enjoy the woods behind my property. The tower itself was barely visible from the deck, hidden behind the trees just as it had always been. One evening about 18 months after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on that deck with a beer, watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, my attorney. "Just wanted to give you a heads up," he said. The Bar Association filed disciplinary charges against Donald Westbrook. Westbrook was the HOA's attorney who'd written all those threatening letters. "For what?" I asked. "Basically for advising the HOA board to pursue an action he knew or should have known was legally baseless. There's evidence he never researched the Telecommunications Act implications and just told them what they wanted to hear. A couple of other HOAs have come forward with similar complaints. Will he lose his license? Probably a suspension and some remedial education, but yeah, it's serious." Turns out he had a pattern of encouraging HOAs to take aggressive positions without properly vetting the legal risks. After we hung up, I thought about how many lives had been affected by this one dispute. Karren Hartford's career and reputation were destroyed. Larry Stenson had a criminal record. Donald Westbrook was facing professional discipline. The HOA had paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars, and dozens of families had been stressed, inconvenienced, and forced to pay higher dues. All because one person couldn't accept that she didn't have the authority to make a homeowner remove a legally permitted structure from his own property. The whole experience had taught me several important lessons. First, know your rights in the law, especially when it comes to property and HOA regulations. Second, document everything because you never know when you'll need evidence. Third, choose your battles, but once you've chosen them, fight smart with good legal counsel. And finally, communities work best when everyone participates and holds leadership accountable. I'd also learned that sometimes being right isn't enough. You have to be willing to stand firm even when it's uncomfortable and expensive. If I'd backed down just to avoid conflict, I'd have lost my primary source of passive income and validated the HOA's overreach. Instead, by standing my ground, I'd not only protected my own rights, but had helped create positive change for the entire neighborhood. The cell tower hummed quietly in the distance, doing its job just as it had for years. Every phone call, every text message, every social media post, every video stream in Willow Creek depended on that tower, and now everyone knew it and appreciated it, even if some were embarrassed that it had taken a crisis to open their eyes. Tom Brennan organized a neighborhood barbecue that summer to celebrate the community and put the past behind us. Nearly every family attended, filling the community center's lawn with picnic blankets and folding chairs. Kids played soccer on the grass while adults chatted and laughed. Someone had brought a volleyball net and a competitive game was underway. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, when Michael Chen came over with his wife and 2 kids. "Warren, I wanted to introduce you to someone," he said. He gestured to a woman I didn't recognize. "This is Diana Foster. She just moved in on Maple Street. Diana, this is Warren Vance, the guy I told you about with the cell tower." Diana laughed. "Oh, you're famous." Michael told me the whole story. "Thank you for fighting that battle. If that tower had come down, I never would have bought here. I work from home full-time and cell service is essential." "Just protecting my property rights," I said, handing her a burger, "but I'm glad it worked out for everyone." As the afternoon wore on, I found myself relaxing and enjoying the company. This was what community was supposed to feel like. People coming together, supporting each other, holding each other accountable, and working toward common goals. Not a board president on a power trip trying to impose her will on everyone. Chester, my beagle, was having the time of his life, collecting pets from every child at the party and occasionally scoring dropped food. He'd become something of a neighborhood mascot, and several families had started bringing their dogs to socialize with him. As the sun began to set and families started packing up, Tom Brennan clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. "I just want to say a few words," he announced. "A little over a year ago, this neighborhood went through something difficult. We learned some hard lessons about governance, about authority, and about the importance of questioning things that don't seem right. Warren Vance stood up for his rights and in doing so, protected all of our interests. I think we owe him our thanks." People applauded, which made me uncomfortable. I'd never wanted to be the center of attention. I just wanted to be left alone to enjoy my property and my tower lease income. "But more than that," Tom continued, "we learned that a community is only as good as its citizens' engagement. This neighborhood is better now because people are paying attention and participating. Let's keep that going." More applause, and then people began to leave. Several stopped by to thank me personally or to chat about various topics. Susan Yang invited me to her daughter's birthday party the following month. Michael Chen asked if I wanted to join a fantasy football league he was starting. An older couple, the Steinbergs, invited me to their anniversary party. I accepted all the invitations, realizing that my life had changed in ways I hadn't expected. I'd moved to Willow Creek for the tower income and the quiet suburban life. I'd gotten a lot more than that, a community that I was actually part of, friendships that mattered, and a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced since college. The whole cell tower saga had been stressful and unpleasant while it was happening, but looking back, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Sometimes conflict forces change that wouldn't happen otherwise. Sometimes standing your ground makes things better not just for you but for everyone around you. As I drove home that evening, Chester snoring softly in the passenger seat, I thought about how strange life could be. A simple decision to buy a property with a cell tower had led to a federal lawsuit, criminal charges, HOA reform, and a complete transformation of my social life in the neighborhood. The tower stood silhouetted against the darkening sky as I pulled into my driveway, its red warning lights blinking steadily. It looked exactly the same as it had when I'd first seen it 8 years ago. But everything else had changed. I'd changed too. Before all this, I'd been content to keep my head down, go to work, come home, and not make waves. Now I was serving on 2 HOA committees, helping to draft new policies that would prevent future abuses of authority. I'd learned that sometimes you can't just mind your own business because other people won't let you. And when that happens, you have to decide whether to fold or to fight. I was glad I'd fought. Over the next few months, life continued its new normal. The HOA functioned smoothly under Tom's leadership. The monthly meetings remained well attended, with residents actually engaging in meaningful discussions about community issues. No one missed the drama of Karren Hartford's tenure, though her legacy lived on in the reforms she'd inadvertently inspired. I received an interesting call in December from a journalist writing a book about HOA conflicts in America. She'd come across news coverage of the Willow Creek cell tower dispute and wanted to include it as a case study. "It's a perfect example of HOA overreach and how communities can reform themselves," she explained. "Would you be willing to be interviewed?" I agreed, spending an afternoon on the phone walking her through the timeline of events. She was particularly interested in the legal aspects and the federal telecommunications law angles. "Most people don't realize how much federal law limits HOA authority in certain areas," she said. "Your case is a great illustration of that." The book came out the following year, and the Willow Creek chapter became one of the most discussed sections. I heard from people across the country who'd faced similar HOA battles, some of them asking for advice or just wanting to share their stories. It was eye-opening to realize how common these conflicts were and how often they stemmed from the same root causes: unclear regulations, unchecked board authority, and residents who didn't know their rights. I started a blog about property rights and HOA law, writing occasional posts about what I'd learned. It became a modest side project that helped a few people navigate their own disputes. I wasn't trying to be an activist or a crusader. I just wanted to share information that might save someone else the stress and expense I'd gone through. The tower lease came up for renewal in its 8th year, and Verizon offered me a significantly increased payment reflecting the site's proven value and the upgraded equipment they'd installed. The new rate was $72,000 annually for another 10-year term. I signed without hesitation. That money, combined with my software developer salary, gave me financial security I'd never had before. I paid off my mortgage, maxed out my retirement accounts, and still had plenty left over. I donated some to local charities and set up a scholarship fund at Ridgewood High School for students interested in studying telecommunications or property law. Karren Hartford's name came up one more time, about 3 years after her arrest. Tom Brennan mentioned at an HOA meeting that she'd reached out to him. asking if she could attend a meeting to formally apologize to the community. The board discussed it and agreed to allow it, though several residents were opposed. She showed up on a cold February evening, looking nervous and humble in a way that was jarring for anyone who'd known her before. The meeting room was packed. Word had gotten around that Karren was coming, and curiosity had drawn a crowd. Tom gave her the floor, and she stood at the podium, hands shaking slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began, her voice quiet. "I don't deserve it. I abused the trust you placed in me as HOA president. I let my ego and my need for control override common sense and the law. I made everyone's lives harder, cost this community a lot of money, and I committed crimes that hurt people." She paused, taking a breath. "I've spent the last 3 years in therapy, doing community service and trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I learned that I have control issues stemming from childhood trauma, and I was using the HOA as a way to feel powerful. That's not an excuse, just an explanation." She looked directly at me. "Warren, you had every right to defend your property, and I tried to bully you into submission. I'm sorry. You showed a lot more integrity and strength than I did." Then she addressed the room at large. "To everyone here, I'm sorry for the stress, the increased HOA dues, and the embarrassment I brought to this community. You trusted me to lead, and I betrayed that trust. I hope you found better leadership and that Willow Creek is the kind of community you deserve." She sat down, and the room was silent for a moment. Then Tom asked if anyone wanted to respond. To my surprise, Susan Yang stood up. "I appreciate you coming here, Karren. It took courage. I hope you're doing better." A few other people echoed the sentiment. The anger had faded with time, replaced by something more like pity. Karren had paid a heavy price for her mistakes, and most people were willing to accept her apology without holding a grudge. I didn't speak at the meeting, but I approached her afterward as people were leaving. "I hope you're finding peace," I told her. She looked surprised. "That's generous of you." "Holding on to anger doesn't help anyone," I said. "You apologized, you're trying to make amends, and you're dealing with the consequences. That's all anyone can do." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." I watched her leave, and I felt something release in my chest. For 3 years, Karren Hartford had been the villain in my story, the antagonist who'd made my life difficult. But she was also just a person who'd made terrible choices and was trying to live with them. Letting go of the anger felt good. The years that followed were peaceful. Willow Creek thrived as a community, with the HOA functioning as it should, managing common areas, organizing events, and handling routine administrative matters without overstepping its bounds. The cell tower continued its quiet work, providing the connectivity that modern life demanded. I eventually met someone, a woman named Rachel, who worked as an environmental engineer. We met at a professional networking event in Paramus, discovered we had a lot in common, and started dating. When I told her about the cell tower saga, she laughed and said, "Well, at least I know you're not afraid to stand up for yourself." We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the Willow Creek Community Center. My neighbors filled the seats, and Tom Brennan officiated, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. It was perfect. Rachel moved into my house, and we talked about starting a family. The tower income would help with that, providing a financial cushion that took some of the pressure off. We spent evenings on the deck, watching the stars and talking about the future. "Do you ever regret buying this place?" Rachel asked one night. "Never," I said honestly. "It's been complicated, but it's home. These people are my friends and my community. I wouldn't trade that." She squeezed my hand. "Good answer." The cell tower stood in the darkness beyond the trees, its lights blinking their steady rhythm. It had been there when I arrived and would likely be there long after I left. It was just a structure, steel and concrete and electronics, but it had become something more. A symbol of property rights, community struggle, reform, and ultimately peace. Sometimes I gave tours to people who were curious about the tower and the story behind it. I'd walk them back through the woods to the equipment shed, explain how the technology worked, and tell them about the legal battle. Most were fascinated, and some had similar stories of their own. The key thing I'd always tell them is to know your rights, document everything, get good legal advice, and don't back down just because someone claims authority they don't actually have. But also be willing to make peace when the fight is over. It was a lesson I'd learned the hard way, but it was one worth learning. The cell tower had taught me about law, property rights, community dynamics, and my own capacity to stand firm under pressure. It had brought me friends, a better neighborhood, and ultimately a partner who appreciated my principles. As I sat there on the deck with Rachel, Chester snoring at our feet and the tower humming in the distance, I felt genuinely content. Life had taken some unexpected turns, but I'd ended up exactly where I needed to be. The HOA had demanded I remove my cell tower. They'd lost signal when I reminded them it was their only one. And in the end, everyone had learned something valuable about rights, authority, and community, including me.